"Can you buy us, mister?" said the young girl holding a baby. The lonely cowboy looked at the woman's face. Colorado. Territory near the Wyoming border. Winter of 1886. The wind howled through the bones of an old trading post, where crooked stalls leaned against each other like drunks, and dust mingled with the first flurries of snow. Beneath the creaking awnings, men sold cattle, saddles, and sometimes souls. Thomas Beckett, age 39, stood at the edge of the crowd. His long coat was weather-worn, his hat shadowing tired eyes that had seen too much and hoped for too little. He had come here only to buy a horse. Not love, never that again. Since Sarah Ellison, his fiancée, his everything, had perished in a boarding house fire ago, Thomas had kept to himself. No woman had crossed his doorstep. He lit a lantern beneath her portrait every night, a ritual of grief, a quiet war against forgetting. Then came a sound too soft for this brutal place. "Can you buy us, mister?" He looked down. A little girl, no older than 4, stood before him. Her cheeks were smudged, her dress threadbare. In her arms, she held a bundled newborn with wide blinking eyes. "Please," she whispered. "We won't cry." Thomas followed, her trembling hand to a wooden auction block. There a woman stood shackled by the wrists, head bowed, hair tangled like vines after a storm. Her shoulders quivered under a rough spun shawl. She said nothing, made no plea, only gripped the hands of the girl with a mother's quiet terror. The auctioneer banged his gavel. "Next lot. Woman fit for cleaning or cooking. Comes with 2 dependents. Quiet stock starting at $10. Someone laughed. Another man called. "I'll pay 5 just to shut him up." Thomas's jaw tensed. He stepped forward. 15. A man in the back shouted. Twice. 35. Thomas said, calm and cold. Silence followed. The gavel hit again. Sold. Thomas moved to the platform, handed over the coins without a word. The girl, still holding the baby, walked beside him without hesitation. The woman stumbled behind, never lifting her gaze. They left the market together, snow beginning to fall. At the edge of the camp, beneath a frost-stiffened pine, Thomas turned. He looked at the woman, the mother, the silent one. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I need to see your face." She hesitated. Then slowly she lifted her head. The light hit her all at once, revealing bruises half-faded and eyes full of stories unspoken. Thomas staggered back a step. His voice cracked as he whispered, "Sarah." She blinked for a heartbeat. Neither moved. And then her lips trembled. Her knees buckled. Thomas caught her before she hit the ground, his hands trembling as they touched her face. Real alive, scarred but breathing. "You've got to be Dick Dan," Darrell said, his bloody hand twitch. Behind them, the little girl clutched her brother tighter. "My mama's name is Sarah," she said softly. Like a dream, Thomas led Sarah and the 2 children through the narrow trail back to his ranch. The hush of pine and snow, a stark contrast to the clamor of the auction. Clara walked beside him, clutching her baby brother, Matthew, while Sarah trailed behind, head bowed, shoulders tense. They reached the rough cabin where Thomas lived alone for years. He offered blankets and water without a word, stepping aside. Respectfully, Sarah's hands moved with quiet precision. She folded Clara's thin coat, tucked it neatly beside the stove, then lifted Matthew to her breast as gently as if he were a fragile vessel. Clara watched wide-eyed and silent. Thomas stepped out to the porch, chest tight. The wind bit icy. He whispered to himself, "She looks exactly like her. Except no living person could resemble someone who had died 5 years ago." Sarah Ellison had perished in that fire. He had believed that he had burned her letters, memorized every crease in her photograph. He had cursed the smoke that stole her. And now this woman wore the same silhouette, the same quiet sorrow. At supper, Thomas laid out hot stew in metal bowls. Clara ate with small, hungry bites. Matthew slept curled against Sarah's body, arms twitching occasionally in a dream. Sarah did not look up at Thomas. She seldom spoke, and only with Clara or Matthew in her arms. After they ate, Thomas showed them to a spare bedroom. Sarah turned to him, meeting his eyes briefly for a second, long enough for his heart to freeze. Thomas thought he saw recognition there. Then she looked away, gathered Clara close, and stepped into the other room. Thomas exhaled. He paced outside until darkness wrapped around him. He could not accept that Sarah Ellison still lived. And yet, every blemish on this woman's face, every scar hidden beneath her dress, told a story he could no longer ignore. The next morning, he watched from the window. Clara burst into the cabin, flushed and shaking. She had an urgent look that did not belong to a healthy child. Sarah knelt beside her, lips brushing her brow. "It is only a fever shadow," Sarah murmured in a voice cracked by exhaustion. "She will be right again." Thomas fetched cold water and herbs set by the hearth. Clara's skin burned. Thomas held a damp cloth to her forehead. He felt the rise and fall of her breath, heard the faint cough between her sobs. Sarah hovered, gentle and haunted. She tilted Clara's head and offered water. She never looked at Thomas, but Thomas saw the way she held her daughter, as if protecting something more fragile than life itself. Hours passed. The fever worsened. Clara whimpered, arms around her mother's neck. Sarah's fingers trembled. Thomas carried Clara to his own bed, weaving her into blankets. He settled beside her, placing the damp cloth on her hair. As he brushed stray strands away from Clara's ear, he froze. There it was, a tiny dark freckle just beneath her earlobe, the same exact freckle Thomas had beneath his own ear. He drew breath, shallow and slow. This could not be coincidence, could it? The same placement, the same shape, a birthmark, like a signature. Thomas felt his world shift beneath him. He stared at Clara's face, flushed with fever, but peaceful. In sleep, his heart thundered. If this child was his, then that woman was Sarah. He retrieved his tobacco pouch, no match, but shook out a pinch and chewed. He stared at the stove flames and clenched his jaw until the pain grounded him. When Clara slept at last, Thomas rose and found Sarah kneeling beside her bed. She held Clara's hand as though she could will the fever away. He approached slowly, his voice was soft. "That mark, is she really mine?" Sarah's head lifted, eyes brimming. She pressed her lips together, nodding slowly. She whispered, "Yes." Thomas swallowed. He closed his eyes, clutched the back of a chair, and let grief and hope mix into a single ache. That night, Thomas found Sarah alone in the corner of the living room, spinning a cracked locket in her fingers. He sat beside her. She flinched, but did not pull away. He said, gently, "Tell me how." She inhaled, drew breath, then began. After the fire, she was taken. The fire had been set. She had been bound, hidden, forced to serve, forced to marry, forced to bear Clara in secret. They never told him about the baby, never allowed her to write. After her husband died, they sold her and the children as debt collateral. She ran, hiding beneath blankets and shadows until tonight. Thomas listened, stunned. The story poured out like a river long dammed. He felt both betrayal and relief. Sarah had never betrayed him. She had been stripped of every choice. Her silence had been her shield. By dawn, Clara slept soundly. Thomas sat by the window, holding Sarah's hand. He stared into the snowy fields. His voice was not hide now, and Sarah let herself believe for the first time in 5 years. She might be found after all. A pale dawn crept through the cracks of the cabin window. Thomas Beckett watched the fire crackle low in the hearth. He sat across from Sarah, whose face was gaunt and drawn, lit by the flickering embers. Clara slept beside her, and on Sarah's lap the infant Matthew stirred softly. Sarah exhaled, her voice trembling with the truth long held in shadow. The fire. It was never an accident, Tom. Thomas's throat tightened. The word brought memories he had buried. Smoke, cries. The towering flames at the lodge. He whispered, "Go on." She tucked both children closer, then began in measured broken tones how it unfolded after that night. They said I was dead. I saw the room burn, the flames catch, but I wasn't inside. They set the fire to hide me. A man, rich, cruel, had bought me. He hired someone to destroy the evidence, my letters, the bed, everything. Thomas clenched his fists. Brittle anger rose in him, but he held still, letting her speak. I was taken. West, Thomas. Shot, but not killed. They bound me, fed me stale bread, wore me, until I could carry no more. Then they forced me into marriage, him a man with no kindness. I bore Matthew under his roof. Sarah's voice cracked. She looked down, and for a moment Thomas thought she might collapse. Then she raised her eyes and stared at him, steady. What? Hunger I still carried. I held on to 2 songs, one for you and one for our unborn child. Clara came months after you vanished. I named her after you. Thomas exhaled, the breath freezing, his pulse pounded, drowning out the crackle of the flames. He saw the line of her jaw, the curve of her cheekbones, once soft beneath candlelight, now sharpened by suffering, but still Sarah's. A month ago, Sarah continued, his temper took him. He struck me. One strike, and he was gone, dead from a fall the next dawn. There had been no obituary, no message, no farewell. They sold me with the children as unpaid debt. I thought I must never show my face until tonight. Thomas stared at her across the hearth. She lowered her gaze and wept, quietly, pressing fingers into Clara's small hand. The weight of all she'd lived through lay heavy in the smoke-filled silence. He rose, walked to the door. Outside the cold bit into him, steel wind, brittle and unforgiving. Under he drew a ragged breath, arms aching, staring into the open gloom. The wind howled across the snow like a lament. Thomas thought of the years he sat alone at the stables, of the nights he spoke her name into the dark, of the photograph he cherished despite its charred edges. He had believed she burned, but all this time she had lived and carried their child. Behind him the cabin door creaked. Sarah stepped forward, hesitant as a ghost crossing a threshold she feared had closed forever. She placed a trembling hand on his shoulder. Her voice was fragile but clear. I tried to die every day, but she made me live. Thomas closed his eyes. He felt the weight of the world he'd imagined crushed beneath years of grief. He turned slowly, gazing at Sarah in a light that had once been love, then grief. Now something pulled taut with desperation and what remained of hope. He stepped back to the hearth and knelt beside her. He reached out and held her trembling hand. She looked at him uncertain, and in that gaze he knew she feared he might vanish again. So he said, "The world took so much from us both, but you came back," and she gently tilted Clara's head as the girl slept, warm and soft. "She came from love from us." Sarah bit her lip to stop crying. Thomas felt something in him uncoil, something between sorrow and blessing. He gently pulled her into the bench beside him and wrapped his coat around her shoulders. The fire crackled. Again, outside, the wind worsened, but inside the cabin, the ache of years bent itself toward something new. Clara murmured in her sleep. Sarah steadied her breath. Thomas exhaled and pressed his forehead to Sarah's temple. He whispered, "I never stopped waiting." And Sarah let herself believe for the first time in 5 years that waiting had not been in vain. Snow fell in a steady hush as the morning crept into the valley. The cabin, still cloaked in smoke from last night's fire, sat like a forgotten prayer in the cold. Inside, Sarah fed Matthew in the quiet, while Clara drew circles in the frost on the window pane. Thomas saddled the horse slowly, every motion deliberate. His mind churned, not with confusion, but with preparation. Something had shifted in him since last night. The pieces of his broken world had not disappeared, but somehow they had turned to form a path. That path was about to be tested. Just before noon, hoof beats echoed down the snowy ridge. Thomas stepped outside. 3 men approached, 2 riders in brown coats, flanking a larger man in a black duster and a bowler hat, tilted low. The man dismounted, boots crunching in the frost. His mustache twitched with disdain. His gloved hands clutched a folded paper. "You, Thomas Beckett," he called out. Thomas didn't answer. He simply shifted his stance. Eyes like cold iron. The man held out the document. I'm here to collect a debtor and her offspring. Woman's name is Sarah Ellison, formerly Sarah Montrose. Her sale's not legal without my consent. That girl and that babe, property under defaulted lien. Thomas took the paper, read it in silence. Bogus. A debt of labor from a man now dead, stamped with a mark no courthouse in the state would recognize. He folded the paper once, then again, then slipped it into his coat and stepped forward slowly. Sir, the man said with forced civility, what you are doing is, by every technical measure, harboring stolen assets. I've already filed paperwork in 2 counties. You can surrender her now or face trial. Your choice. Thomas glanced back at the cabin. He saw Clara's small face in the window. Sarah stood just behind, holding Matthew tightly. Then he turned back. His voice was low. Final. That's no property, he said. That's my family, and you're trespassing. The man's smile disappeared. You think you can protect them, cowboy? You think a tin badge from 15 years ago makes you the law? It don't. We are the law now. We hold the ledgers and the court's answer to paper, not can smoke. Thomas's eyes narrowed. He took one step closer, then another. Then he drew. The revolver came out slow, but his aim was steady. He pointed it down, not at the man, but at the frozen earth. Between them, a gunshot cracked. The ground split near the man's boot. He stumbled back, hand half reaching for his pistol. Thomas didn't blink. I buried one life years ago, he said, voice like gravel. And I have dug enough graves to know who belongs in the ground. You ever come back to claim what ain't yours? I won't aim for dirt. Silence. The riders behind the man looked uneasy. The horses fidgeted as if spooked by more than just sound. The man gave a tight, bitter smile. You're making enemies of people with deeper pockets than you can imagine, Beckett. I've fought men with more gold, Thomas replied, but none of them had Clara's eyes. A long pause. Then the man turned, whistled, and mounted his horse. Enjoy your peace, cowboy, he called. You won't have it long. They rode off, snow kicking up behind them. Thomas stood still until the sound of hooves disappeared into the trees. Only then did he lower the gun. Behind him, the door creaked. Sarah stood there, pale but calm, Matthew asleep in her arms. Will they come back? She asked. Yes, Thomas said. But next time we will not answer alone. Sarah stepped beside him, leaning slightly into his side. He felt the warmth of her through the cold. She asked. He nodded. If they want to take something that matters, they'll have to come through both of us now. Inside, Clara opened the door. Wider. Mama, she said softly. Why did the bad men leave? Sarah smiled, her hand resting on Thomas's. Because your papa told them to, she said, and for the first time, Thomas Becker did not correct her. The late afternoon sun dipped behind the ridge, casting the hills in a warm golden hue. Dust rose gently under the hooves of a chestnut. Maris Thomas walked beside it, one hand steadying the reins, the other guiding Clara, who sat upright in the saddle with determined little hands. Easy now, he said gently. Let her feel your legs. She'll follow your heart if it's steady. Clara nodded, her brow furrowed in concentration. The mayor responded, trotting in a small arc through the pasture near the cabin. Sarah watched from the porch, arms wrapped around baby Matthew. Her eyes followed every movement, every word. Thomas's voice, once so foreign and distant, now warmed the earth it touched. Clara finished her loop, and Thomas lifted her down. She stumbled into him, laughing breathlessly. I did it, she said, cheeks flushed. You did, he said, crouching to her height. You were brave. Clara looked at him quiet for a moment. Her smile faded slightly. Can I ask something? She whispered. Thomas's throat tightened. He nodded. I wish I had a real paw like you, she said. The words landed deep, too deep to speak past. He swallowed, pulling her into a gentle hug. Her small arms wrapped around his neck without hesitation. Behind them, Sarah pressed her lips together, the tears coming. Without fight, not for what she had lost, but for what she now saw clearly ahead. Later, as twilight crept in, Sarah sat at the table with a worn piece of parchment and trembling fingers. Thomas lit the lamp beside her. "You sure?" he asked. She nodded. "He will keep coming. Not just for us. He has done this to others. If we stay silent, we help him keep going." Thomas placed a steady hand over hers. "Then we speak." Sarah dipped the pen and began to write. "To the office of the sheriff, County of Ridgewood," she began, her script slow but unwavering. "I am Sarah Ellison, once declared dead in the fire of 1881. I was taken that night by a man named Silas Kearney, who runs a network under the guise of indenture trade. I am alive, and I testify he forged my death, took my freedom, and has done so to others." She paused, the candle light flickering in her tear-brimmed eyes. She continued, describing the house in Kansas, the men she'd seen traded like livestock, the chains, the tea laced with root toxin, the false debts scrolled on fake ledgers. When she was done, Thomas signed his name at the bottom beneath hers. Witness, protector, believer. He folded the letter, sealed it, and tucked it inside his coat. "All right, at first light," he said. "They'll listen. They have to." Sarah touched his sleeve. "Thank you." He looked at her, not as a man pied, but as a man choosing hope. "I should have found you sooner," he said quietly. "You weren't meant to," Sarah replied, voice soft. "Not until you were ready to save more than just me." Outside, Clara giggled as she rocked Matthew's cradle. Inside, Thomas and Sarah sat together in the warm hush, leaning finally into the fragile, fierce hope they had once buried and now dared to believe in again. The wind shifted as the sun climbed higher over the rooftops of Ridgewood. It carried with it the weight of something different, something uncertain but stirring. Thomas felt it as he helped Sarah and the children down from the wagon parked in front of the county hall. The town square buzzed with cautious curiosity. Word had spread fast. The lone cowboy who lived beyond the creek had returned, this time not just with a rifle, but with a woman once thought dead and a child who looked too much like him to be coincidence. Inside, the civil hall echoed with boot steps and whispered breaths. A deputy motioned them forward. Sheriff Ezra Malaloy stood at the front of the room, arms folded, his mustache twitching as he took in Sarah's tired but unwavering face. Thomas stepped forward. "We request a public hearing," he said calmly, "for Sarah Ellison, my former fiancée, declared dead, but clearly breathing, and not just with air, with truth." The sheriff raised an eyebrow. "That a fact?" Sarah took a breath and stepped past Thomas, carrying Matthew against her chest. Clara clutched her skirt tightly. "My name is Sarah Ellison," she said. 5 years ago, I was taken from a boarding house in Kansas the night it burned. I was held by a man named Silas Kearney. He trafficked women under false deaths, faked my death with the help of a bribed landlord. I was pregnant when taken. I gave birth to Clara in captivity." A murmur rippled through the gathered townsfolk. A woman near the back gasped audibly. Sarah continued, voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "He moved me between towns. When my second husband, a man I was forced to marry, died, I was sold. Again, I was about to be auctioned when Thomas found me." She turned to him, eyes full of weary gratitude, and saved me. The sheriff frowned, chewing the inside of his cheek. "You have proof." Thomas stepped forward. He laid the sealed letter on the table. "Signed testimony. Her handwriting. Witnessed by me." She named dates, locations, names of others. "You can follow the trail." The sheriff opened it and began scanning. His eyes narrowed at certain names. "I know one of these women," a voice said suddenly. Heads turned. A tall woman with silver streaks in her dark braids stood up near the corner. Her voice quavered. "My sister worked at that house in Kansas. We thought she ran off." She wrote once, then vanished. She pointed at Sarah. I remember you. You helped her hide once. Sarah blinked, recognition dawning slowly. I knew it, the woman said louder now. That fire, they said you died in it. But I remember your room was empty that night. My sister told me. Said she saw men dragging you out back. A hushed uproar broke through the crowd. Someone swore under their breath. Sheriff Malloy raised a hand. Order. He turned to Sarah. You willing to sign this before a magistrate? Yes, she said. He nodded. Then this becomes official. He reached behind him and pulled out a clipboard. After scratching something down, he handed it to a deputy. Put a federal wire out. I want Silas Kearney. Named and hunted. Full warrant. Get me a judge in the morning. The moment sealed. With ink and silence. The room exhaled. Years of lies cracking in the light of day. Thomas turned to Sarah. You were never lost, he said quietly. Just stolen. Sarah's lip quivered, but she smiled, not with joy, but with relief. Clara pulled at her mother's sleeve. Does this mean we get to stay? Thomas knelt beside her. No one's taking you again. Matthew gurgled in Sarah's arms. As if to agree, the sheriff cleared his throat. You'll need protection. Karen has friends in low places. Thomas stood up. Let them come. Outside, the wind picked up again, but it no longer carried fear. It carried change. The scent of wood smoke curled gently through the air as Sarah swept the porch of the cabin that now belonged to all four of them. The structure, once silent and still like Thomas's heart, now breathed with life, footsteps, laughter, and the soft creak of floorboards under little feet. Each morning, Sarah laid out a row of smooth river stones behind the house, calling out the alphabet and letting the local children trace each letter with a stick. It started with Clara, shy and curious, then grew to include 2 neighbor boys and a girl from the lumber camp. By the end of the week, 6 children sat on logs as Sarah guided them through their letters. Inside, Thomas sat at the table with a coffee he forgot to drink. His eyes were on Clara, who concentrated hard as she etched her name onto a piece of paper. My name is Clara Beckett. She beamed as she held it up. Thomas's throat caught. The name was not just a title. It was a claim, a bridge, a homecoming. Later that evening, after the children had scattered, and Sarah bathed Matthew in the tin basin, Thomas stood in the back room of the cabin, the one he had once kept locked. He reached for a cloth-wrapped parcel behind the rafters, dust thick on the fold. He unwrapped it slowly. Inside lay an old framed gerpipe of his parents, long gone, but never forgotten. Beside it, another smaller frame. Sarah's portrait, taken the summer they promised to marry. Her eyes were as clear as he remembered. He hung the frame side by side above the mantel. Then he crossed the room, opened the top drawer of the bureau in what was now Sarah's room, and set down a small wooden box. Inside it, cushioned and felt worn with age, was the engagement ring he had never been able to give her. He closed the drawer quietly and left it for her to find. That night, Clara padded into the main room, holding something tight against her chest. She climbed onto Thomas's lap without a word, nestled there for a moment, then reached up with a homemade booklet. I made this, she said, her voice soft. Thomas opened it. Inside were drawings, childish and bright. 3 figures on horseback, one tall, one with a long braid, one small with pigtails. Underneath, in Clara's careful scroll, were the words, "We found the home you lost." P. Thomas's chest rose with a breath so deep it hurt. Sarah stood by the doorway, her hand resting on the frame, her face unreadable. He looked up, eyes shining. I do not know what I ever did to deserve this, he whispered. Sarah stepped forward, kneeling beside him and Clara. You waited, she said. You believed, even when it hurt. Thomas looked down at Clara, then at the ring he had once buried in silence. And in that moment, the house became more than timber and stone. This became whole. The wind rolled soft across the high plateau, brushing tall grass into a whispering hush. No church bells rang. No polished pews or silver cutlery clinked behind fancy linen. Just earth, sky, and the worn path that had led them here through grief, through fire, through silence. It was the first morning of spring. Thomas Becket stood at the edge of the hilltop, where he and Sarah had once spoken of forever, back when they were young and the world still made sense. He wore a clean white shirt tucked into his only good pair of trousers. The sleeves rolled to his elbows. His hat sat respectfully in his hands, head bowed, waiting. Tara walked slowly up the slope. Her dress was not silk or lace, but a hand-stitched gown of soft white cotton cinched at the waist with a braided cord. Her hair flowed loose down her back, catching the morning sun. In her arms wrapped in a wool shawl, Matthew slept soundly. Clara skipped ahead barefoot, holding a bouquet of wild flowers she had picked from the meadow below. Sunbursts of yellow, lavender, and pink. A small circle of townsfolk stood to the side, quietly watching. Sheriff Holden, old widow Merle, the pastor from Riverbend, and a few neighbors who had come to believe in miracles once more. No fanfare, just the kind of people who had learned that love did not always arrive in silk gloves or Sunday carriages. Sometimes it arrived in broken boots and second chances. Thomas turned as Sarah reached him. He stepped forward and gently took Matthew from her arms, cradling the baby against his chest while Clara handed Sarah the bouquet. They stood there, just the four of them, in the sunlight. Thomas looked at Sarah, then knelt. He did not pull a ring from his pocket. Instead, he lifted a long strand of prairie grass he had braided that morning. With a calm reverence, he wrapped it around both their wrists, binding them together. His voice was low, steady, but it carried over the wind. Not a vow for show, he said. No altar, no choir. Just this, a promise made in dust and blood and the years we lost. I am yours, Sarah. All of me, even the broken parts. Sarah blinked back, tears, her hand tightening over his. I've always been yours, she whispered. Even when the world called me dead. Even when I could not speak your name out loud. It was always you. Thomas stood, still holding the baby close, and Sarah stepped into him, their foreheads touching, their eyes closing. From the side, Clara ran forward and flung her arms around their legs. This time, she said, voice full of certainty, we all stay. The wind paused as if holding its breath, and in the stillness, something shifted. Thomas Becket, once known as the loner with shadows behind his eyes, was no longer the man who only spoke to ghosts. He was a husband, a father, a man who had found the woman the world tried to erase and the child he never knew he had. He looked down at Clara, her face pressed against Sarah's hip. He kissed her hair and whispered, we stay, sweet girl, we stay. The pastor stepped forward, saying a quiet blessing. But the real ceremony had already happened when Thomas chose love over bitterness, when Sarah chose truth over fear, when Clara chose to believe that families could be built again, even from ash. They stayed on the hilltop long after the others left. The sunlight warmed the grass, and laughter rose from the valley below. Matthew stirred, then yawned, blinking up at the face of the man who now held him not out of duty, but choice. Sarah sat with her back against Thomas's chest, Clara lying in the crook of her lap. Wild flowers scattered at their feet. I thought love was something we only got once, she said quietly. Thomas leaned in and kissed her temple. Maybe, but if that's true, I am just glad we get to finish ours. And as the sun dipped low, throwing gold across the plains, the Becket family remained, tied not by blood alone, but by something fiercer, a promise kept, a love reborn, a life rewritten in the dust and wind. If this story stirred something in your heart, if you felt the wind on that high plateau, or the weight of years lost and finally found, then this is just the beginning. Keep watch. Unwind for the synergistic online program for late. At Wild West Love Stories, we bring you tales of love that defied fire, time, and dust. Stories where hearts were broken but never gave up. Stories like Thomas and Sarah's, where even after death, love found its way home. If you believe in second chances, in promises made not with gold but with grit and devotion, then subscribe to Wild West Love Stories. Like, share, and ring the bell so you never miss another ride through the untamed heart of the American frontier. We do not just tell stories, we remember them. And maybe we remember something in ourselves, too.